We stopped Putin on the battlefield. No one had done this before, but we stopped Putin on the battlefield. This is exactly what the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky, said in an interview for the conservative channel, the conservative American media outlet Newsmax. He also said many other important things concerning the front. Still, I suggest we talk about what is happening at the front, what the situation is. This is important. I understand there is the Iran-Israel war. I understand that it's good that Russia's ally is being worn down, and it's good that they are striking Russia's ally Iran, which supports Russian aggression and has supplied weapons to Russia. Now there won't be, or at least there will be significantly less, because Iran itself is facing serious problems due to Israel's strikes, and because Iran has depleted certain stocks of drones and missiles that it launched at Israel, and it won't transfer them to Russia. But the first important thing is that it's very good that President Zelensky gave an interview specifically to the media outlet Newsmax. This media outlet is relatively new in the United States of America, but it was precisely with Trump's rise to power that it received White House accreditation and became one of the favorite and important media sources, followed by both Donald Trump himself and his supporters, that is, the MAGA audience and beyond. And the fact that this interview was published on YouTube, that there is a text version and that there is a Ukrainian translation, this is important because it is precisely a way to reach out. And on the eve of the trip, obviously, the trip of the Ukrainian president to Canada, where a very important international event will take place, the G7 summit, the meeting of the G7 countries. There are expectations, and currently intensive negotiations are underway to organize a meeting between the presidents of Ukraine, Zelensky, and the USA, Trump. In fact, a series of discussions and negotiations will take place. In the spotlight and under close attention, of course, are some very important issues. First, it is the continued coordination of forces, resources, and efforts to maintain the unity of the West, that is, the transatlantic unity between the United States of America and the countries of the European Union, and to jointly invest in defense and security, to jointly increase NATO defense spending, to jointly consider and implement strategies to counter the challenges and threats that are emerging now, namely those coming from Russia, from Iran, and from North Korea. And the second issue is oil prices. What is important for us as a result of the G7 summit is whether it will be possible to agree that a barrel of oil will cost no more than $45 at the very least. Well, listen, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022-2023, the price per barrel reached $70 or $80 and sometimes even up to $100. But of course, if it drops below $50, that might not be absolutely critical yet, but it definitely wouldn't be enriching Putin and his regime. That's for sure. And against the backdrop of tightening sanctions, if the United States were to impose stricter sanctions, specifically on Russia's oil and gas sector together with the European Union, if they actually block the Russian tanker fleet in practice, Putin would have a very hard time, especially by the end of the year or the beginning of next year. The situation could deteriorate significantly. That's why such a meeting is being prepared, and I hope it can take place at the same level and in the same atmosphere, at the very least, as the meeting between Zelensky and Trump that took place at the end of April in the Vatican. So there will still be some progress. It is important for such a meeting to take place, and on the eve of President Zelensky's trip to Canada, to give an interview specifically for Newsmax aimed at the American audience, explaining what is happening. This is absolutely right, and it is important. Well, first of all, Zelensky pointed out that we have stopped the Russian offensive. I would say that indeed Despite the fact that the enemy has made some advances, they are still only tactical. We are not saying that the enemy is currently capable of or has the resources and means to achieve any kind of breakthrough at the operational strategic level. There are problems with that. At the tactical level, yes. Secondly, the president of Ukraine says and makes it clear that the situation is somewhat stabilizing in the Sumy region and that the advance of Russian troops is being blocked there. In other words, the enemy is not being allowed to approach Sumy. The Washington Post has just published an article about the threats facing Sumy today, namely airstrikes. Analysts interviewed by the leading American publication do not believe that Russia is currently capable of capturing Sumy or encircling it. Konrad Muzyka, a respected European security analyst, essentially supports my point of view and agrees that the main objective of the offensive and the primary theater of combat operations is still in the Donetsk region. And during the summer and autumn offensive campaign, Russia will focus specifically on capturing the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. As for incursions into the Sumy or Kharkiv regions, these are all attempts to divert our attention, to try to direct our reserves, for example, to the Sumy region instead of to Donetsk or Dnipropetrovsk, where it is necessary to defend and support the actions of our defenders. And these are in fact, let's say diversionary directions. Russia's main offensive will be focused on the Donetsk region. At the same time, according to the Ukrainian president, there are currently more than 50,000 Russian troops in the Sumy direction. The deepest advance in the region is 7 kilometers from the border, and the president stated that the armed forces of Ukraine managed to stop the Russian offensive in the Sumy region. This is indeed the case. Also, according to the president, Ukrainian forces managed to regain control over the settlement of Andriivka in the Sumy region. And this is important. So they are managing to hold them back. Moreover, I can say that from what I know, and I wouldn't want to go into any specific details regarding the conduct and execution of operations, but I will say that as far as I know in general, no one is planning to just remain in constant defense either. Whenever possible, the Ukrainian defense forces will operate specifically in a mode of maneuverable active defense, and as soon as the opportunity arises, they will not only repel, and not just repel, attacks by Russian troops, inflicting maximum losses and preventing the enemy from achieving what could be called an operational breakthrough or encircling our forces, flanking maneuvers and so on, but whenever possible, our units will of course also counterattack, fighting for and reclaiming certain positions and pushing the aggressor's forces back. We have seen this before and in other directions as well. I can say that, of course, when talking directly with the soldiers who are working on the front lines, having conversations, the situation is truly difficult. It is difficult because the enemy is using a large amount of aviation, air bombs, drones and artillery. The enemy is truly concentrating its forces. They are carrying out their assaults wave after wave, just wave after wave. And in fact, with these human wave assaults, they are simply trying to exhaust our positions, just provoking us so that our logistics can't keep up with delivering ammunition to the positions for certain types of weapons. So this is what Russia is doing. They don't care about their own losses, even though they've already crossed the 1 million mark. But we are managing to hold them back. As for the Donetsk region, the risks for the Dnipropetrovsk region have indeed increased because the enemy is closer, and the intentions of the Russian troops here are to try to create a gray zone, that is, to push our forces back and prevent the defense forces of Ukraine, the armed forces, from approaching the Donetsk region from the Dnipropetrovsk region, specifically in the Pokrovsk direction. Well, the goal is obvious. It is to try to block and disrupt our normal logistics in this direction. This is the enemy's objective and task. Therefore, well, and in addition, the second goal is frankly informational and propagandistic. That is, the Russians need to show photos and videos to make it look as if they have spread the flames of war to yet another Ukrainian region. This is necessary in order to carry out internal mobilization and to show their own population, like, look how the Russian offensive is advancing, everything is going well for us, because no matter what, even the so-called deep people that Surkov wrote about, sooner or later also start asking questions. So what is actually happening? Why is this so-called special military operation dragging on for so long? While drones are flying over Russian territory and the geography of these strikes is only expanding, why is the war shifting onto Russian territory? That's why they need to show something, try to mobilize, to present some kind of victories. Secondly, why is Russia doing this? This is pressure on Ukraine, an attempt to demoralize and, let's say, undermine our national resistance. And thirdly, of course, while preparing for some future negotiations in Istanbul, although it's doubtful when or even if the next round will take place and under what conditions or agreements. But if it does take place, then of course Russia will use this as an additional argument and an attempt to put pressure on the Ukrainian delegation, as if to say, look, we are already pushing further here in the Dnipropetrovsk region. So essentially, these are the enemy's intentions. Why are they acting this way? As for the overall defensive operation, it is ongoing. There are very tough, fierce battles taking place. It is obvious that the enemy will do everything possible so that over the next 2, 3 or 4 months, as long as the weather conditions allow, he can achieve more results in order to really try to capture Donetsk region somewhere by mid-autumn or by the end of the year. This is in fact Russia's operational strategic plan for the summer campaign. However, our forces are managing to actively counter and hold them. I hope that in order to really stop them to some extent, the missile program will help us. The president of Ukraine said that the Sapsan missile, a Ukrainian ballistic missile, has passed its tests and is now being prepared for production. Of course, the president of Ukraine did not disclose the quantity or other details for obvious security reasons. He did absolutely the right thing. And likewise, Volodymyr Zelensky is directly, essentially through Newsmax, addressing President Trump, saying, well, I'll put it in plain language, not diplomatically as the president does, but just in simple terms calling on him to rein in Pete Hegseth, the head of the Pentagon, and urging Trump to reconsider the decision and tell Hegseth that he is not entirely correct or right when he says that in 2026 the volume of aid to Ukraine should be reduced. Of course, it's possible that Trump thinks the same way and Hegseth is not acting entirely on his own here, but rather he is, well, coordinating his timing and position with the White House. But still, it would be worth pausing for a moment. And the president of Ukraine is appealing to this as well. We'll see. I think a lot will depend on the upcoming meeting with Trump, which will take place very soon in Canada. So I will be watching and keeping you informed